Welcome back. I am Maria, and this is Beyond Fluent English. In the last episode, we worked on emotion words, the difference between nervous and apprehensive, between disappointed and disheartened. Today, we move to a different kind of upgrade, not how you describe feelings, but how you introduce ideas. Because here is something worth thinking about. When you say, I think, or I believe before a point, the words are correct. They work, but they do not tell the listener very much. They do not signal how confident you are, how seriously you want your view to be taken, or how carefully you have considered it. Advanced speakers choose their opinion language the same way they choose any other word, deliberately. Today, I'm going to give you 5 upgrades for the phrases you use to introduce your views. By the end of this episode, you will sound not just fluent, but thoughtful. And that difference is bigger than you might expect. Let us begin. The first upgrade is one you will use immediately. The phrase is, I think. You know it well. It's one of the first things learners say in English. I think this is good. I think we should change it. I think you are right. It works. But it is soft. It does not say much about how confident you are or how much you have considered the point. The upgrade is, I would argue. What is the difference? I think is neutral. It places an idea in the air without much force. I would argue does something more specific. It signals that this is a considered position, that you have thought about it, that you are prepared to defend it if someone pushes back. It does not mean you are aggressive. It means you are serious. Here is an example. Nina is in a team meeting. The group is discussing a new product feature. She says, I would argue that launching in Q3 is too soon. The testing is not complete, and we would be taking an unnecessary risk. That is not aggressive. It is clear, professional, and confident. In a more personal context, Tom is talking with a friend about a film they both watched. He says, I would argue it is one of the best films of the decade, actually. The storytelling is unlike anything else I have seen. This same phrase works here too. It gives weight to the opinion without making it sound like a lecture. Use I think for small, everyday observations. Use I would argue when you have a real position, one you have considered and are ready to stand behind. The second upgrade is for moments when your confidence is higher. The phrase, I believe, a step up from I think, slightly warmer, slightly more personal, still common, still useful. The upgrade, I am convinced. This is a significant shift. I believe suggests you hold a view. I am convinced suggests that view was formed through a process, that something led you there, evidence, experience, observation over time. It sounds like the conclusion of thinking, not just the start of it. Here is an example. Clara has been working in education for 12 years. In a conversation about teaching methods, she says, I am convinced that students learn better when they feel safe to make mistakes. I have seen it too many times to think otherwise. That phrase, I am convinced, carries all 12 years of experience inside it. It closes the door on easy disagreement without being rude about it. In a professional context, imagine James presenting research findings to a client. He says, based on what we have seen in the data, I am convinced this market is underserved. The opportunity is real. Again, not aggressive, certain, grounded. Keep I believe for general views. Use I am convinced when you have arrived at a position through real experience or evidence, and you want the listener to understand that. The third upgrade sounds a little different from the others, and that is exactly what makes it useful. The phrase, I feel. Soft, personal, sometimes a little vague. I feel like this is not working. I feel like we are missing something. The word feel carries emotional weight, which is sometimes what you want, but sometimes it makes your point sound less grounded than it is. The upgrade, it strikes me that. This phrase does something interesting. It takes the personal quality of I feel, the sense that this is your genuine observation, but gives it more precision. It strikes me that suggests the idea arrived with some force. That you noticed something, and it made an impression. It sounds observational rather than emotional. Here is an example. Yuki is in a conversation about a colleague's presentation. She says, "It strikes me that the main argument was never quite clearly stated. Everything around it was excellent, but the central point kept shifting." That is careful, honest, and not unkind. It would sound quite different as, "I feel like the argument was not clear." The same observation, but the first version sounds more measured. In a personal context, Leo is talking with a friend about a decision the friend is about to make. He says, "It strikes me that you have already made up your mind, actually. You are looking for permission, not advice." A bold thing to say, but said with this phrase, it lands thoughtfully rather than bluntly. Use I feel when emotion is genuinely part of the point. Use it strikes me that when you want to share an observation that feels significant, something you have noticed that deserves attention. Now, repeat each sentence after me. Take the full pause before moving on. I would argue that this approach carries more risk than the team has acknowledged. I would argue that this approach carries more risk than the team has acknowledged. Having worked on this for 2 years, I'm convinced the direction needs to change. Having worked on this for 2 years, I am convinced the direction needs to change. It strikes me that the real issue here is not the budget, it is the timeline. It strikes me that the real issue here is not the budget, it is the timeline. The fourth upgrade is for when you want to signal perspective rather than just opinion. The phrase, "in my opinion," very common, very functional, but also very visible. It announces itself. In my opinion, this is the wrong decision. In my opinion, we should reconsider. It works, but it can sound a little formal or slightly defensive, as if you are pre-apologizing for having a view. The upgrade, "from my perspective." The difference is subtle but real. In my opinion claims a position. From my perspective signals a vantage point. It says, this is where I am standing, and from here, this is what I see. It is a more sophisticated framing. It invites the listener to consider your angle rather than simply compare opinions. Here's an example. Anna is in a discussion with colleagues from different departments about a company decision that affected everyone differently. She says, "From my perspective, the communication around this change was the biggest problem. The decision itself I can understand, but no one told us what to expect or when." That phrase, "from my perspective," signals that she knows other people may have seen it differently, and she is sharing her particular view, not declaring the only truth. In a casual conversation, Ben is talking with a friend about a city they both visited. His friend loved it. Ben says, From my perspective, it was a little overwhelming, honestly. Too crowded, too fast, but I can see why you loved it. Again, it allows disagreement without confrontation. Use in my opinion for direct, clear positions. Use from my perspective when you want to acknowledge that your view comes from a specific place and that other views are possible. The fifth upgrade is one many learners overlook: how to disagree with sophistication. The phrase, I do not think. Simple, clear, common. I do not think that is right. I do not think we should do this. It works, but it can sound abrupt, a door closing quickly. The upgrade, I am not entirely persuaded. This phrase does something elegant. It expresses disagreement, real, honest disagreement, but leaves the door slightly open. It says, you have not convinced me yet, not you are wrong. That distinction matters enormously in professional settings, in negotiations, in any situation where the relationship matters as much as the point. Here is an example. Clara is reviewing a proposal with a junior colleague who is excited about a new idea. She says, I am not entirely persuaded by the timeline here. I would want to see the assumptions behind it before we commit. That is honest, not dismissive. It gives the colleague a chance to respond, and it keeps the conversation going rather than shutting it down. In a personal context, Nina is listening to a friend make a case for a major life decision. She is not sure it is the right move, but she respects her friend's thinking. She says, I am not entirely persuaded that moving now is the right moment, but you know your situation better than I do. What makes you confident in the timing? Disagreement, respect, and a real question, all in one. Use I do not think for clear, straightforward disagreement, where directness is fine. Use I am not entirely persuaded when the relationship or the conversation calls for more care, when you want to disagree without closing the door. Now, let's put all 5 phrases into one story. Listen for each one and notice how it moves the conversation. James and Clara are preparing a joint presentation for senior management. They have been working together for 3 weeks, and they do not always agree. Clara opens the final review session. She says, I would argue we are leading with the wrong data point. The growth numbers are strong, but the retention figures tell the more important story. James pauses. He has been convinced of the growth-first approach since the beginning. I am convinced the growth numbers are what leadership actually wants to see in the first slide, he says. We have heard that from them directly. It strikes me that what they said they want and what will actually move them might be different things, Clara replies. She is not dismissing him. She is offering a different reading. From my perspective, the retention data is what makes this growth sustainable, she continues. Without it, the growth looks temporary, and that is exactly the concern they raised in the last quarter. James is quiet for a moment. He looks at both versions again. Then he says, I am not entirely persuaded you are wrong, actually. Give me 20 minutes with it. They changed the slide. 3 quick exchanges to close. I will say the basic version first, then the upgrade. Notice the difference in weight. I think the deadline is too short. 3 quick exchanges to close. I will say the basic version first, then the upgrade. Notice the difference in weight. I think the deadline is too short. I would argue the deadline is unrealistic given what we know about the scope. In my opinion, the plan needs more work. From my perspective, the plan is missing a clear decision point, and without one, the team will not know when to move. I do not think this is the right approach. I am not entirely persuaded this is the right approach. Can we look at the assumptions together before we commit? Here is what today's 5 upgrades share. They don't just express a view, they tell the listeners something about how you think. I would argue signals preparation. I am convinced signals experience. It strikes me that signals careful observation. From my perspective, signals awareness. I am not entirely persuaded signals respect. When you choose these phrases, you are not just upgrading your vocabulary. You are showing the listener that your opinions come from somewhere real. In the next episode, we look at how you describe agreement and disagreement in conversation. Because I could not agree more, and I would push back on that, do very different things to a discussion. And knowing when to use each one changes how people experience talking with you. I will see you there.